When you live in an HOA neighborhood, you learn two rules fast. Never show weakness and never own something nicer than the president. I learned both the hard way the day my pool got me reported. It started one ordinary Saturday. The sky was bright, my filter was humming, and I was floating in the water with an iced tea balanced on the edge like I'd earned it. Across the fence, Karen, the HOA president, was trimming her rose bushes in that tight-lipped fury that meant she'd spotted joy happening somewhere she didn't approve of. She appeared at the gate 5 minutes later, clipboard in hand, lipstick sharp as a warning sign. "Mark," she said, using that tone people reserve for toddlers and telemarketers, "we've had complaints about your pool use." "My pool use?" I sat up, dripping. "Yes. Multiple residents have noticed you never offer shared access. As the community amenity manager, it's my duty to remind you that neighborhood facilities are meant to encourage inclusivity." "My pool," I repeated, "is in my backyard." Karen smiled like she was explaining algebra to a chicken. "Yes, but you opted into HOA property guidelines when you moved in. The pool falls under recreational use. It's a shame to see one homeowner monopolizing it while others roast in their yards." That's when I realized she wasn't joking. She had a printed notice in her folder titled Violation, Non-Shared Amenity. She actually wrote me up for not inviting the neighborhood to my private pool. I didn't even get angry. I just blinked at her and said, "Karen, if you want to swim, you can just say so." Her expression curdled. "This isn't personal. It's about fairness. I expect your compliance within 7 days, or there will be fines." Then she clicked her pen, handed me the notice, and left like she'd just delivered a court summons. By evening, the gossip wheel was spinning. I caught snippets over fences and hedges. Apparently his pool's community property now. Karen said she's drafting new access rules. One neighbor texted me a meme of Noah's Ark with the caption, "Everyone gets a ride." I laughed it off, until I got the official email from the HOA board. They were reviewing new recreational equity guidelines that would require pool-owning residents to provide limited access to neighbors on designated weekends. I read it twice, certain it was a prank, but the sender line was real. Karen had CC'd herself and the board attorney. That's when I decided to play it cool. The trick with people like her is never to fight their madness head-on. You redirect it until it collapses under its own weight. So I replied politely, "Thank you for the update. I'd be happy to cooperate under the appropriate administrative framework. Could you please define limited access and neighbors for billing purposes?" Billing. I knew that word would itch. Within an hour, she called. "Billing?" she repeated, scandalized. "Of course," I said cheerfully. "If it's community access, I'll need to cover maintenance, cleaning, liability, electricity. I assume HOA members will reimburse their share. Should I send invoices individually, or through the board?" Silence. Then, "You cannot charge people for a shared amenity." "Oh, I can't? But I'm being fined for not sharing." "You'll need to pick one." That's when she hung up on me. The next week was quiet. Too quiet. I could feel her plotting behind those trimmed hedges. The mailman started giving me odd looks. 2 houses down, her friend Patty began timing her dog walks to coincide with my afternoons outside. Once, I caught them taking photos through the fence slat. Then came the notice. HOA fine $250 for non-compliance with shared amenities regulation. I stared at it, then actually laughed. It was so absurd it looped back to entertaining. But that laughter didn't last long, because buried in the small print was a line authorizing the board to schedule community swim hours pending homeowner participation. Meaning she planned to open my gate herself. Saturday morning, I woke to the sound of voices, children laughing, splashing. For one surreal second, I thought I was dreaming. Then I looked out the window and saw half the cul-de-sac in my backyard. Karen stood by the gate holding a stopwatch, directing fair turns like some deranged lifeguard. I stormed outside. "What in the hell is this?" She smiled serenely. "Community swim day. Don't worry, Mark. We're keeping everything under control. It's only until noon. In my pool. Technically the community's pool, she corrected. Something inside me snapped, but not the kind that yells. I went perfectly calm, which is usually when I get my best ideas. Enjoy yourselves, I said, turning back inside. She looked surprised that I didn't argue. That was fine. I had a plan to make her wish she'd never touched my gate. I spent that afternoon calling an old friend, an insurance adjuster. We talked liability coverage, guest waivers, injury clauses. I learned more about recreational law in 2 hours than I ever wanted to. By Sunday, I drafted my own document, pool use agreement, guest access fee, $25 per adult, $10 per child, waiver required. I emailed it to the HOA board with a short note. Effective immediately, all non-residents of this property must register and pay the guest fee prior to entry. Payments will fund insurance and maintenance as required by your new shared amenity rule. Then I printed laminated copies and hung them on my fence. Monday morning, Karen was back, fuming. You can't charge fees. You said it's a community amenity. Communities charge for amenities. Unless you're saying it's private again, in which case, happy to rescind the waiver. She sputtered. You're weaponizing bureaucracy. Just following the rules, I said. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the unstoppable force of entitlement meeting the immovable object of sarcasm. Then she did what Karens do best. She called a meeting. 2 nights later, we gathered in the community center under fluorescent lights. The board members looked exhausted. Karen launched into a 10-minute speech about fairness, unity, and maintaining shared values. I waited until she paused for breath before sliding a folder onto the table. Here's the problem, I said evenly. If you claim my pool is community property, the HOA becomes legally liable for accidents, maintenance, and sanitation. My lawyer estimates that could triple your insurance premiums. One board member actually paled. I continued. But if it's private property, I can charge guest fees as I see fit. So which do you prefer, budget collapse or invoices? The silence that followed was delicious. Karen tried to rally. This is intimidation, she said shrilly. He's exploiting legal loopholes. The treasurer sighed. Or maybe we overstepped. By the end of the meeting, the motion to rescind the shared amenity proposal passed unanimously, except for Karen, who stormed out mid-vote. I thought that was the end. I underestimated her pride. 2 mornings later, I found a new notice taped to my door. Pending review, unauthorized business activity on residential property. Apparently, my guest fees qualified as a business. That's when I smiled, because she'd walked right into my next move. I printed one last sign and hung it on my fence. Private pool, HOA guests welcome, $25 fee paid directly to HOA fund. Then I forwarded a photo of it to the board with a cheerful note. Per Karen's recommendation, all pool guest fees will be donated to the HOA. Now it wasn't me running a business, it was them. I could almost hear the board's collective groan from my patio. And as for Karen, she didn't know it yet, but she'd just made herself financially responsible for every swimmer in that water. And that was just the beginning. By the next morning, Karen's empire was wobbling like a pool float in a windstorm. I could tell because the HOA's official email arrived at 8:03 a.m. Earlier than the garbage trucks, earlier even than Karen's first sip of decaf soy latte. It was addressed to all residents. Due to ongoing administrative confusion regarding pool access, the HOA will temporarily suspend community swim activities pending further legal clarification. In other words, they'd been caught in their own net. I read it twice while sipping coffee by the window. Across the cul-de-sac, Karen was outside in her robe, furiously on the phone, pacing in tight circles like a general whose troops had surrendered overnight. Her roses, her pride and joy, remained untrimmed for the first time since I'd moved here. That alone was victory enough for a day. But if there's one thing I've learned about HOA drama, It's that calm never lasts. Within hours, a new battlefront opened. Gossip. Patty from 2 houses down came over, just to say hi. She lingered at my fence with exaggerated nonchalance, eyes darting toward the pool. So, are people still allowed to use it? She asked. Not unless they pay the HOA's new guest fee, I said cheerfully. Her eyebrows shot up. Oh, so it's real? Karen said you're profiting off the neighborhood. I'm donating it to the HOA fund, I said, smiling sweetly. Karen insisted. Patty blinked, processing the paradox. Wait, so she's mad that you're following her rule? Exactly. She left muttering something about how things used to be simple before the new president. That afternoon, I got my first official visitor, the HOA's vice president, Doug. He was the sort of man whose tie always looked slightly too tight, like he'd been born into meetings and never quite escaped. Mark, he said, clearing his throat, we need to talk about your sign. The donation one? Yes. It's creating confusion. Good, I said. Confusion is how people start asking questions. He sighed, rubbing his temple. You're enjoying this. I didn't deny it. Doug, between you and me, you know this whole community pool nonsense is absurd. He exhaled. Look, I agree. But Karen's persistent. She's been president for 6 years. People are afraid to cross her. She'll drag everyone into meetings until they give up. That told me everything I needed to know. Karen ruled by exhaustion. She didn't win arguments. She simply outlasted people's patience. Which meant the only way to beat her was to keep her busy. So busy she ran out of steam herself. The next morning, I started my own paperwork war. First, I filed a maintenance reimbursement request to the HOA for community pool chemicals. I attached photos of chlorine jugs, filter replacements, and a neat spreadsheet listing costs per guest hour. Then, I mailed a certified letter to the board's P.O. box requesting insurance verification for all community events occurring on my property. Finally, for the cherry on top, I submitted a noise complaint against myself. Reports of laughter and splashing during HOA-sanctioned swim hours. Please confirm if these remain in effect. By noon, Doug called again. You can't just file everything at once, he sputtered. Why not? I asked. Karen said we're one big community. He groaned. You're going to kill her with paperwork. That's the idea. For 2 glorious days the neighborhood was quiet. The only drama came from Karen's front porch, where she'd set up a folding table and piles of binders, muttering to herself as she flipped pages. Occasionally, I saw her typing furious emails on her tablet, probably to the HOA attorney. Then came Thursday, the day she tried to strike back. I came home from work to find an orange sticker on my mailbox. Notice of noncompliance, unauthorized signage. She'd cited me for the donation sign. Again. This time, I didn't respond by email. I printed a full-size poster board version of the same sign, framed it in waterproof plexiglass, and mounted it right by my pool gate where it was visible from the street. Underneath, I added one line in red marker. Approved by HOA President per policy. The next morning, I saw her standing at the curb staring at it like she'd just discovered a portal to another dimension. She didn't say a word. She just took photos. That night, I received another email. Emergency HOA meeting tomorrow 6 p.m. I went. I always go. It's better to watch the meltdown firsthand. The room was already tense when I walked in. The board members looked like overworked referees. Karen sat at the head of the table, posture rigid, jaw clenched, hair sprayed into battle formation. Mark, she began before I even sat down, we are here to address your ongoing noncompliance with HOA signage policy. I nodded. Which policy? Section 7A, unsanctioned displays visible from public roads. You mean the one about lawn ornaments and election posters? My sign is informational, not decorative. Doug hid a smile behind his folder. Karen slammed her pen on the table. You're twisting everything. I'm following your logic, I said calmly. If the pool is community property, the community has a right to know about fees. Transparency is important. There was a murmur of agreement from 2 board members. Karen's face darkened. She turned to them. You can't possibly support this. The treasurer sighed. Honestly, Karen, he's technically right. The secretary added softly, maybe we should just drop this whole pool thing. It's gotten weird. For a second I thought that might end it, but Karen wasn't done. She pivoted hard. Fine, she said coldly. If he insists it's private, then all related expenses, landscaping, fencing, and water drainage, fall solely under his responsibility. That means his yard can no longer connect to the HOA irrigation system. I raised an eyebrow. You mean the one that waters the grass on both our properties? Exactly. It was a petty, surgical strike. She wanted to dry out my lawn in revenge. I smiled. All right. But since my pool drains excess water into that same system, I'll need to redirect it elsewhere. I'll just install a runoff channel toward the street. Shouldn't be a problem. Doug choked on his coffee. He knew exactly what that meant. Every rainstorm would send chlorinated overflow straight toward her driveway. Karen froze, calculating. That would violate community water flow standards. Oh, so it's community water again? I said mildly. We keep circling back. The room erupted in stifled laughter. That was the moment I saw the first real crack in her composure. Her authority, the thing she prized more than her manicured roses, was slipping. She ended the meeting abruptly, claiming she had another appointment. The rest of us lingered, chatting, laughing quietly. I could tell half the neighborhood was starting to enjoy the spectacle. That weekend, I doubled down on optics. Saturday morning, I hosted a community pool fundraiser barbecue. I printed flyers using the HOA logo, public domain, technically, and distributed them door to door. The sign-up sheet included suggested donation, $25 per guest, proceeds to HOA pool maintenance. By noon, my yard was packed. Families grilled burgers, kids splashed, music played. I stayed out of the water, just walked around greeting people, shaking hands like a campaigner. When anyone asked if Karen approved, I'd grin and say, of course, she's the one who made it possible. By mid-afternoon, she appeared. She stood on the sidewalk, stunned silent, clutching her phone. A dozen neighbors waved cheerfully. Someone shouted, "Hey Karen, grab a burger." Her smile twitched. "This isn't an authorized event," she hissed when I walked over. "It's a fundraiser for the HOA," I said pleasantly. "You'd object to that?" Her nostrils flared. "You're mocking the association." "I'm strengthening community spirit," I replied. "Look, people are happy for once." That line landed. You could see her realize it. The neighbors weren't on her side anymore. She'd built her power on intimidation, not affection. Now they were laughing with me instead of obeying her. She didn't stay long. 10 minutes later, she stomped back to her house. But not before muttering, "You'll regret this, Mark." Maybe she believed that. But I was already planning my next move, a way to make sure she couldn't just rewrite the rules again. Because if Karen wanted a war of rules, I'd give her one. I'd rewrite the entire HOA constitution right under her nose. And I already knew exactly how. It's funny how neighborhood politics feel like small-town government with lawn chairs instead of city halls. The same egos, the same rules, the same love of power for power's sake. After the barbecue, I realized something simple but crucial. Karen didn't fear confrontation, she thrived on it. What she couldn't handle was loss of control. So I decided to take it from her, one line of policy at a time. I started with the bylaws. The HOA sent them out every year, and like most people, I'd skim them once and then use them as a coaster. But that night, I read every page, every clause, every archaic comma. And somewhere between pet restrictions and architectural requests, I found gold. Section 12C. Residents may propose amendments to the bylaws by submitting written notice to the board, followed by a 60-day community vote requiring 2/3 approval. 60 days. 2/3. That was my battlefield. I wrote my own amendment. Private property amenities shall not be subject to shared use obligations unless explicitly owned or maintained by the HOA. Simple, clean, impossible to argue against without sounding insane. Then I got creative with the presentation. I printed it in full-color brochures titled, The Homeowner's Freedom Clause. I included photos of happy families enjoying their backyards in peace, stock images, of course, and bold lettering that read, Protect your privacy. Preserve your property rights. I slid them into mailboxes at dawn, one by one. By the next afternoon, the cul-de-sac was buzzing. Patty came by first, brochure in hand. Is this really happening? She whispered. It's a proposed amendment, I said. Just common sense. Karen's going to lose her mind. That's the point. And she did. The very next morning, she called an emergency HOA clarification session. Half the neighborhood showed up, mostly curious. Karen opened with a PowerPoint labeled, Preserving Community Harmony. She lectured for 15 minutes about unity, respect, and the dangers of divisive amendments. When she tried to downplay my proposal as unnecessary, I raised my hand. So, just to confirm, I said, you're officially against property privacy? Her jaw tightened. I'm against selfishness disguised as independence. Understood, I said, pretending to take notes. I'll quote that on the next flyer. A ripple of laughter moved through the room. Karen turned crimson. This isn't a joke. No, I said, deadpan. It's democracy. That line stuck. I could feel it. Even the quiet ones, people who usually just paid dues and kept their heads down, started to look at her differently. Over the next week, I became a door-to-door politician. I didn't push hard. I just talked to people, listened to their gripes about Karen's flower color mandates and holiday decor violations. Everyone had a story. I was just the first to weaponize mine. When the petition hit 30 signatures, Karen snapped. She showed up at my door, clipboard shaking in her hand. You're turning neighbors against me. I smiled. I'm giving them a choice. This isn't a game, Mark. You're undermining the HOA. Karen, I said calmly, you are the HOA. You built it around yourself. I'm just installing an exit door. She glared at me for a long moment, eyes darting to the stack of brochures on my table. You think this will stop me? I'll veto it. You can't, I said softly. Bylaw 12C. Member vote overrides board veto. For the first time since this whole mess began, she didn't have a comeback. She just stood there, breathing hard, and finally said, You'll regret embarrassing me. Then she walked off, slowly, deliberately, like someone planning the next move in a chess game she refuses to believe she's losing. The next move came faster than I expected. 3 days later, my mailbox was flooded with letters. Noise complaint. Water usage violation. Unapproved lighting fixture. She was throwing the entire rulebook at me, hoping something would stick. But here's the thing. Every one of her notices had to go through official review. And I knew the bylaws now better than she did. I spent my evenings drafting calm, precise replies, citing line numbers, clause references, and even precedent from past cases. By the 5th one, the HOA's attorney himself emailed me to say, Please resolve this internally. The board is overwhelmed. Which was exactly what I wanted. Overwhelmed boards make mistakes. Mistakes open doors. 2 weeks before the vote, I hosted another community pool fundraiser. This time, it wasn't just about burgers and splashing, it was strategy. I brought out a portable projector and showed a slideshow of my proposed amendment, along with screenshots of Karen's contradictory emails about shared amenities. Every time her words contradicted themselves, laughter broke out. It was slow, subtle humiliation, the kind that spreads under the skin. By the end of the night, I had nearly every signature I needed. The only people not on board were Karen's two closest allies, Patty, who'd begun wavering, and Leonard, the treasurer, who just looked perpetually terrified of confrontation. Karen retaliated by going public. The next morning, the neighborhood Facebook group exploded. She posted a long, sanctimonious essay titled, "The Dangers of Individualism in a Community." It was 4 paragraphs of passive-aggressive poetry about how some homeowners forget the meaning of togetherness. It backfired instantly. Dozens of comments poured in. "So we can't enjoy our own backyards now? Karen, you fine me for hanging wind chimes. Didn't you trespass into Mark's pool?" I didn't even have to reply. The neighborhood did it for me. That night, I got a text from Doug. "You've officially hit 68%. The amendment passes next week." For the first time in months, I relaxed. The fight wasn't over, but the finish line was in sight. Karen's rule was crumbling. Or so I thought. The day before the vote, she struck with her most desperate move yet: sabotage. I woke to the smell of chlorine so strong it burned my throat. I stumbled outside and froze. My pool water was green. Not just murky, neon swamp green. Karen stood at the end of her driveway, feigning surprise. "Oh my! What happened to your water?" "You tell me," I said flatly. She shrugged, all innocence. "Maybe a chemical imbalance? Should have shared the maintenance with the community." My filter was still humming. The cover was open. Someone had clearly poured something in overnight. For a moment I almost snapped. But then a better thought hit me. This wasn't damage, it was evidence. I called the HOA maintenance line, one of those numbers she herself managed, and reported a suspected contamination of shared community property. If she wanted my pool to be community property, then fine, it was now her problem. By afternoon, 2 board members and a professional water tester stood by the pool. The guy dipped a sensor and frowned. "High concentration of copper sulfate. Pool algicide. Way too much." Doug gave Karen a sharp look. "You were the last one here during last night's inspection round." She blanched. "That's ridiculous." I stayed silent, just watching. When the report came back, the email went to the entire board. Confirmed chemical contamination. Recommended source: human introduction. That night, the neighborhood chat went wild again. Someone had vandalized my pool. Everyone knew who. Nobody said her name, but the silence was its own verdict. By the next morning, Karen's roses were gone, dug up, replaced with a new sign: under repair. HOA landscaping project. She'd vanished from sight. No pacing, no yelling, no binoculars through curtains. It was almost eerie, the quiet. But I wasn't fooled. She wasn't defeated, just regrouping. And deep down, I knew she wouldn't accept losing to me. Still, when the final vote came through 2 days later, 74% in favor, I allowed myself a small smile. The homeowner's freedom clause passed. My pool, my property, my rules. Neighbors congratulated me like I'd just won an election. Even Doug shook my hand and said, "You've done the impossible. You outmaneuvered her." I wanted to believe him. But that night, as I walked past Karen's house, I noticed something odd. Her curtains were drawn tight, yet I could see flickers of light inside. Computer screens, phone glows, movement. She wasn't sulking. She was scheming. And whatever she was planning next, I had a feeling it would make the pool drama look like child's play. For 2 weeks, the neighborhood basked in peace that felt almost suspicious. No new notices, no emergency emails, no HOA patrols measuring lawn height. Karen's silence was too neat, too deliberate. Like the quiet part of a storm that fools you into thinking it's over before the second wave hit. I should have known better. It started on a Thursday afternoon, when I came home to find a city code inspector parked in my driveway. Clipboard, neon vest, mirrored sunglasses, the full bureaucratic costume. "You Mark Bennett?" he asked. "Unfortunately," I said. "Got a report of unpermitted electrical work." I blinked. "Where?" He pointed to the outlet near my pool. the one powering my filter and light. This connection doesn't match the city's permit database. I stared at it. It's been there since the house was built. 20 years ago. He shrugged. Report came from your HOA. I just follow procedure. I could already guess who filed it. He spent 30 minutes measuring, photographing, filling out forms, and left me with a cheerful warning. If you can't prove the wiring's original, you'll need to bring it up to current code or pay a fine. As soon as he drove off, I saw her blinds twitch across the street. There she was, hidden behind the slats, watching. The next day, another inspector arrived, this time for improper drainage. Then one for non-compliant fence height. By Saturday, I'd met half the city's code department. She wasn't attacking me directly anymore. She was burying me in bureaucracy. But if Karen thought she'd invented weaponized paperwork, she'd forgotten who taught her the art. That Sunday, I gathered every letter, every report, and scanned them into a neat PDF file titled Harassment by Proxy, Pattern of HOA-Initiated Code Enforcement. Then I sent it to the city ombudsman's office, CCing the HOA board, their attorney, and a local news station that loved suburban madness stories. Within 48 hours, the city called off all inspections pending review. The local reporter sent a polite email asking for comment on a potential HOA abuse of municipal complaint systems. Karen must have lost her mind when she read that, because the following morning, she appeared on my doorstep in full fury. "Do you realize what you've done?" she snapped. "Stopped wasting city resources?" I said. "You've humiliated this entire community." "No," I said evenly. "You did that the day you turned a neighbor's backyard into a war zone." For a second, I thought she might actually lunge at me. Her hands clenched around that ever-present clipboard like she wanted to break it in half. But instead, she hissed, "You think you've won. You haven't. You're one violation away from foreclosure." She stormed off, slamming her heels against the pavement hard enough to echo. That line stuck with me, though. Foreclosure. It wasn't just bluster. HOA boards technically could impose fines, liens, even force sales in extreme cases. She'd gone from absurd to dangerous. The next week, a thick envelope arrived from the HOA attorney. Inside, a notice of outstanding fines and legal fees. They'd resurrected every old violation she'd ever filed and reassessed them under new bylaws. The total came to $3,750. My jaw actually dropped. But halfway through reading, I started to laugh. Because the letter wasn't signed by the board, it was signed solely by Karen, HOA president. No co-signatures, no treasurer approval, nothing. She'd gone rogue. I drafted a 2-sentence reply. Your notice lacks board authorization. Any further attempts to collect invalid fines will be treated as harassment. CC. Legal counsel. Then I printed 5 copies, mailed them, certified, and waited. By Thursday, I got an email from Doug. "We didn't approve any of that." She acted alone. "We're holding an emergency session to review her position." That's when I realized I might actually get what every HOA-tortured homeowner dreams of, a full-blown mutiny. The meeting that night was chaos before it even began. Half the neighborhood showed up. People stood in the hallway, muttering. Karen sat at the front, trying to maintain that queenly posture, but she looked worn. Hair flat, smile forced. Doug opened with a cough. "We're here to discuss concerns about unilateral board actions." Karen shot him a glare. "You mean enforcing community standards?" A woman in the back raised her hand. "You mean stalking and fining your neighbors?" That broke the dam. People started talking over each other, shouting about her flower color rules, her threats, her spying. It wasn't just my feud anymore, it was collective rebellion. Karen slammed her clipboard down. "I have dedicated 6 years to keeping this community respectable. You people don't appreciate how hard I work." I leaned forward. "Maybe that's the problem. Nobody asked you to run a kingdom." Her voice cracked. "You think you're clever, don't you? Turning everyone against me?" I didn't turn them, I said softly. You just gave them permission to say what they already felt. Silence. Long, brittle silence. Then Doug cleared his throat. Motion to remove Karen Stevens as HOA president, effective immediately. Hands went up across the room. Almost everyone. She just sat there, frozen, eyes darting around as if waiting for someone, anyone, to defend her. But nobody did. When Doug read the result, 31 votes to 2, she stood up, trembling, and said, "You'll regret this. All of you." Then she left. No one followed. That night, the neighborhood chat filled with celebratory emojis. Patty sent me a text that simply said, "It's over." But I couldn't shake the unease. Karen wasn't the kind of person who accepted endings. She was the kind who rewrote them. For a few days, things seemed genuinely peaceful. Doug became interim president. Meetings got shorter. Notices stopped arriving. The air felt lighter. Then, one afternoon, I came home to find a "for sale" sign in Karen's yard. It was so sudden, it felt wrong. She hadn't even put the house on the market through the HOA channels. But the next morning, the sign was gone. So was her car. Curtains drawn, windows dark. Rumors spread fast. She'd moved in with her sister. She'd sold the house quietly. She'd been forced out. Everyone had a theory, and nobody knew for sure. 2 weeks passed. I let my guard down. The weather turned warm again. The pool sparkled clear blue, and for the first time in months, I swam without watching the fence line. That's when the letter arrived. No return address. Just my name, written in that familiar looping handwriting. Inside was a single sheet. "You may have one, but you taught me how the game is played. Don't ever forget that." No signature. But it didn't need one. I stared at it for a long time, trying to decide if it was a threat or just her final gasp for attention. Either way, it made my skin crawl. The next day, Doug confirmed the obvious. Karen had officially resigned, sold her house to a property management company, and disappeared. Relief came slowly, but it came. I started rebuilding my yard. New plants, new furniture, even a little outdoor bar. The neighbors relaxed too. Kids biked freely again. Patty's husband put up wind chimes just because he could. It was almost perfect. Until the night I heard the splash. It was close to midnight. I was inside reading when the sound jolted me upright, a clear, deliberate plunk of something hitting the water. I grabbed a flashlight, heart pounding, and stepped out back. The pool shimmered under the moonlight, still and calm. But near the edge something floated, a clipboard. Soaked, warped, but unmistakably hers. I pulled it out. The metal clip was rusted. Inside the pages were ruined, but one line still visible in faded ink. Violation, failure to comply with shared access. My breath fogged in the cool night air. The gate latch was still locked from inside. No footprints, no sounds. Nothing but the whisper of wind and the faint scent of roses. I stood there for a long time, just staring at that clipboard. It could have been some prank, a leftover relic, anything rational, but deep down, I knew. Karen wasn't finished. And whatever came next, it wouldn't be paperwork. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that clipboard floating again, its water-warped pages, the faint ghost of Karen's handwriting like a curse resurfacing. Rationally, I told myself it had to be a coincidence. Maybe a kid found it in her trash, tossed it in for fun. Maybe wind carried it from the recycling bin. But even as I tried to believe that, I kept checking the locks twice, then 3 times. The next morning, I tossed the clipboard into the garbage and buried it under yard waste. I told no one. The neighborhood was too peaceful to wake up old ghosts. For the next few days, life pretended to be normal again. The HOA elected Doug officially as president. The bylaws got simplified. The board dissolved 3 subcommittees entirely. Meetings became potlucks instead of interrogations. Even Patty stopped whispering like every conversation was bugged. Still, strange things began happening in small doses, so subtle I almost ignored them. The mailbox flag left up even when it was empty. My garbage bins turned slightly sideways. The pool light flickering once at night, then working fine the next day. Little things, just enough to unsettle. Then came the roses. It was late April when I noticed them, fresh red roses planted along my fence line. Not mine. Too perfect, too deliberate. The same variety Karen had obsessed over. They appeared overnight, perfectly spaced, as if someone had measured them out. I asked Patty if she'd seen anyone outside late. She shook her head. Not a soul. Why? Just landscaping, I said, pretending to smile. But that night, I stayed up again. And sure enough, around 1 a.m., I heard the faintest crunch of gravel near the fence. I crept to the window, careful not to cast a shadow, and saw a shape, small, hooded, moving methodically with a flashlight. I caught only a glimpse before the light snapped off and the figure disappeared behind the hedge. The next morning, the roses were watered. That's when I stopped pretending it was coincidence. I installed a motion sensor camera above the gate and wired it to my phone. I didn't want to call the cops yet, I needed proof first. The last thing I wanted was to sound paranoid and end up as another HOA cautionary tale. For 3 nights, nothing. The camera caught only raccoons and the occasional cat. Then on the 4th, at 2:47 a.m., it pinged. The image was grainy but unmistakable, a woman in a dark hoodie standing at my fence, head down, facing the pool. She didn't move for a full 30 seconds. Just stood there, staring. Then she reached out, touched the fence latch, and left. I froze. I replayed the clip 10 times. The resolution wasn't perfect, but the stance, the way the head tilted, God help me, it was her. Karen. Except she was supposed to be gone. Sold her house. Moved out. Vanished. I sent the clip to Doug with a short message. Do you recognize this? He called me immediately. Mark, please tell me that's not real. It's from last night. She can't be back. Her old property's rented already. We had new tenants move in last week. Then either someone's pretending to be her, or she's trespassing. He exhaled heavily. I'll check with the realtor. Just be careful, okay? Always am. That was a lie. Because the next night, I did something reckless. I left the pool light on deliberately, bait. I even played soft music outside, left the gate slightly ajar. Then I turned off every indoor light and waited near the back window, heart drumming in my ears. It was almost 1 a.m. when she came. The hood again, the same slow step. She paused by the roses, touched one, then walked straight to the pool. She crouched down, staring into the water like it was a mirror. I couldn't see her face clearly. Just the reflection of her phone's screen as she took a photo. That's when I stepped outside. Looking for something? She froze. The flashlight wobbled. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then a voice, calm, familiar, answered, just checking the filtration system. HOA inspection. My skin prickled. You don't work for the HOA anymore, Karen. The light turned off. The shape straightened slowly. How do you know it's me? Because no one else cares about my pool this much. Silence again. Then, softly, you ruined everything, Mark. I took one step forward. Go home. She laughed quietly. Home? This was my home. When I blinked, she was gone. Just like that, slipped into the shadows behind the hedge, leaving the faint scent of roses in the air. The next morning, I checked the footage. She'd parked somewhere off camera, walked in from the empty lot behind the houses. No plate, no car visible. I sent it to Doug again. This time, he didn't hesitate. I'm calling the police. She's trespassing. But when the officer came by that afternoon, he was polite but indifferent. No harm done, sir. She didn't break anything. Hard to press charges for standing near a fence. I showed him the video. He nodded sympathetically. Keep documenting if it happens again. We'll log it. That was the problem with people like Karen. They knew exactly how far to go without crossing the legal line. The following weekend, more roses appeared. This time, planted directly in front of my gate like a barrier. Tied around one stem was a note in plastic, You can't fence off what belongs to everyone. I stared at it, numb. That night, I doubled the lights, reinforced the lock, and ordered taller fencing panels. But something about it felt pointless. Karen didn't need to break in, she'd already gotten inside my head. The neighbors started noticing too. Patty came by whispering, "You won't believe this. Someone left roses on my porch too. With a note about restoring order." She laughed nervously, but I could tell she was scared. Doug called later that night. Half the board got weird mail, unsigned letters about community values returning. Karen's fingerprints are all over it. Can we prove it's her? He hesitated. Not yet. But I found something else. He forwarded me a link, an online HOA forum. Someone under the username HOAQueenForever had been posting rants about corrupt boards, lawless homeowners, and property theft. The writing style, the phrasing, it was her voice, digitized. The most recent post ended with, "They took my title, but not my rights. I'll reclaim what's mine." Doug wanted to ignore it. I couldn't. I printed every post, every comment, filed it in a binder, and labeled it in case she escalates. By the next week, the weirdness went public again. A neighbor's pool chemicals vanished. Another's sprinkler timer was smashed. Patty's security light stopped working the same night her trash cans were overturned. Everyone whispered Karen, but nobody saw her. Then came the night of the storm. Heavy rain, thunder rolling like drums. Around midnight, power flickered out. I was in bed when the motion alert buzzed my phone. I opened the feed and froze. The camera showed the gate swinging open. Wind roared. Water streamed off the deck. And through it all, that same hooded figure walked straight toward the pool. She bent down, dropped something heavy into the water, and disappeared into the rain. By morning, the storm had passed. I went outside cautiously, flashlight in hand, scanning the water. Something metallic glinted near the bottom. I grabbed the net pole and pulled it up. It was a garden sign, rusted, jagged. Words barely legible beneath algae. HOA President keeping order. Her old sign. I sat on the wet concrete, staring at it. Whatever she'd become, ghost, vandal, or just an angry woman clinging to control, it didn't matter. Karen had turned our neighborhood into her obsession, and now she was haunting it in more ways than one. Doug called later that afternoon. Police are increasing patrols. But if she shows up again, don't confront her. Just call. I promised I would. But deep down, I knew I wouldn't. Because some part of me wanted to face her one last time, not for revenge, not even for justice. Just to understand why people like her can't let go. I had no idea that the final confrontation would come sooner than I expected, and that it wouldn't end the way either of us imagined. The storm that night had drained something from the neighborhood. The air felt heavier, quieter, like everyone was waiting for the next act in a play they hadn't bought tickets for. I didn't sleep much. Every sound, the hum of the fridge, the creak of branches, felt amplified. Even the pool's soft ripple outside the window seemed to whisper that Karen wasn't done. By dawn, the power was still flickering, so I made coffee on the gas stove and sat by the window. Across the street, Patty's porch light blinked on and off like Morse code. She texted a few minutes later, "Did you see the police car last night? Parked near Karen's old lot." I hadn't. But when I stepped outside, tire tracks curved through the wet road, leading straight to the vacant property. The grass was flattened near the side fence where her roses used to grow. Someone had been there. By noon, Doug arrived, sleeves rolled up, face tight. "You won't like this," he said. "The new tenants moved out." "What?" "They said someone kept knocking at their windows at night. They found roses on their porch, too. They think this street's cursed." I exhaled slowly. "She's escalating. She's obsessed," he said. "She's trying to reclaim that house, or what it represented." I nodded. "Control." He leaned on the fence, lowering his voice. "Look, the police think she's living out of her car somewhere nearby. Her sister reported her missing last week. They can't locate her. The words hung between us like static. Missing. Not gone. Just unaccounted for. For 2 days, nothing happened. I wanted to believe she'd finally burned out. But Karen never left quietly. On the third night, I woke to a low rumble outside. Not thunder, not a car. A mechanical growl. I pulled the curtain aside and froze. A small generator was running in the empty lot next door, its light flickering faintly through the trees. And next to it, half hidden by darkness, was a figure kneeling in the mud. I slipped on a jacket and stepped out quietly. The rain had started again, soft but steady. As I got closer, the hum of the generator mixed with another sound, the rhythmic scrape of a shovel. "Karen," I said quietly. She didn't turn around. Her hood was soaked, her hands filthy. She kept digging, the shovel blade cutting into the wet soil. "Karen," I repeated louder. Finally, she stopped. Her head turned slightly, and her voice came thin through the rain. "I'm fixing what you broke." "What are you doing?" "Restoring the boundary," she said, stabbing the shovel down again. "This lot was mine. The fence line's wrong. You moved it. You all moved everything." My chest tightened. "Karen, that house isn't yours anymore. You sold it." She laughed bitterly. "No, the HOA sold it. Paperwork means nothing. I built this community." Lightning flashed. For a split second, I saw her face, mud-streaked, gaunt, eyes bright with exhaustion and something close to madness. "You need to stop," I said carefully. "You're trespassing." She stood straight, gripping the shovel. "You think you won? You think they respect you? They'll turn on you next, just like they did to me." Her voice cracked. "They don't want fairness, they want someone to blame." I kept order. I took a slow step closer. "You wanted control, Karen. Not order." For a heartbeat, we just stood there, the rain thick between us. Then she dropped the shovel, shoulders sagging. "You're all ungrateful," she murmured. The generator coughed, sputtered, and died, plunging the lot into darkness. I reached for my phone, but before I could unlock it, she was gone, slipped into the tree-line like a shadow dissolving. I called Doug immediately. By the time police arrived, she was nowhere to be found. They searched the area, found tire tracks leading toward the service road, and left a patrol car on our block for the night. I didn't sleep at all. The next morning, the rain had washed the mud smooth again. The shovel lay abandoned in the grass. I picked it up, it was one of mine. From my shed. That was when I decided I'd had enough of playing defense. I spent the weekend tearing out every rose she'd planted, replacing them with gravel and concrete edging. I installed motion lights so bright they could have guided aircraft. Then I called the HOA board and proposed something unexpected, a community memorial garden on the vacant lot. Doug hesitated. "You sure that's a good idea?" "Yes," I said. She wanted that land to mean something to her. "Let's turn it into something better." The board agreed. By the following week, half the neighborhood showed up with tools, seeds, and saplings. Kids painted stones. Patty brought lemonade. For once, the HOA came together without fines or threats or forms. We worked all day, sweating under the sun. By evening, the lot had transformed, a patchwork of new soil, benches, and young flowers. Doug placed a small plaque near the center that read, "Community begins with kindness." It was simple, almost corny, but perfect. When night fell, I stood at the edge of the pool and watched the reflection of the garden lights flicker across the water. For the first time in months, I felt like maybe the chaos had ended. Then I saw it, just for an instant, a single red rose floating across the water's surface, spinning slowly in the current. I waded in, heart hammering, and picked it up. No note this time. No trick. Just a flower, perfect and silent. I left it on the garden plaque. Weeks passed without incident. The patrols stopped. The new tenants moved back in, reassured by the calm. Life settled into something resembling normal again. Still, sometimes late at night, I'd hear the faint hum of an engine far off, the same low growl of that generator, and I'd wonder if she was out there somewhere, watching. Then one afternoon, Doug called. His voice was quiet. They found her. I froze. Where? About 20 miles out. Her car was parked near a nature reserve. They think she'd been living out there for weeks. She's gone, Mark. Exposure. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The words didn't feel real. She wasn't evil, I said finally. She was just addicted to control. Doug sighed. Yeah. Some people can't stop managing things, even when everything's already falling apart. That evening, I sat by the pool again. The water was calm, the air still. The sky burned orange, fading to violet. I thought about the clipboard, the roses, the endless arguments about fairness and rules and power. All of it seemed so small now, like a series of storms that had finally spent themselves. And yet, part of me missed the conflict, the absurdity, the adrenaline. Maybe that's why people like Karen thrive. They give everyone a villain to rally against. Without her, the neighborhood was peaceful but eerily quiet like a town. After a parade's gone by. A week later, the HOA voted to rename the garden after her. The Karen Stevens Memorial Green. People chuckled at first, thinking it was ironic, but I argued for it. Let it be a reminder, I said, of what happens when power stops being about community. The motion passed unanimously. Now, sometimes when I walk past that plaque, I think about how easily the whole war started. A pool. A fence. A fine. A woman who couldn't stand not being in charge. And me, too stubborn to let her win. We were both right in our own warped ways. She believed order kept people safe. I believed freedom kept people sane. Maybe the truth sat somewhere in between, floating quietly like that rose. Summer rolled back around. Kids splashed again, laughter carrying across the yards. Patty's wind chimes sang in the breeze. The HOA newsletter came out with no threats, no warnings, just a recipe for lemonade. Sometimes I still catch myself glancing toward the fence at dusk, expecting to see her standing there with that clipboard. But all that's left now are her roses, blooming stubbornly at the edge of the memorial. Last week, one of them grew through the fence line into my yard. I almost cut it back, but then I didn't. I left it there, bright red against the green, swaying gently in the sunlight. Because maybe not every boundary needs to be enforced. Some of them, I realized, are better left a little blurred, just enough to remind us that peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's knowing when to stop fighting. So when neighbors wave from their decks and kids jump into my pool without asking, I just smile. They still pay their guest fee though. $25 straight to the HOA fund. Karen would have hated that part.